Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hi, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I'm super excited for this conversation with Melanie Curtin, who we recently met at a conference. And as soon as I met her, I'm like, oh, we've got so much to talk about. So I will give Melanie the opportunity to introduce herself and let her tell of what the awesomeness that she's doing in her work and sharing with the world right now. So Melanie, share with us what you up to.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for having me on. I run my own podcast, and it's really fun to be a guest, so I really appreciate it.
Of course.
It's fun to see an invite on my calendar that said podcast where I wasn't hosting. I was like, oh my God, this is really fun. So I am a sex researcher with a master's from Stanford, and I am also a coach primarily for men, but I'm also working with some couples around sex, dating, and relationships. And I have...
We all need that information.
Yeah, for sure.
So how did you become a sex researcher?
Yeah, so great question.
Was there a class for that in Stanford?
No, not yet, although I would say that's one of my goals. Goals.
Setting intentions, putting it out there. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. It is, on my vision board and everything. So my story sort of starts a few years ago with a boy. There was this guy, which, every story that starts that way is going to be good.
Once upon a time, there was a boy and a girl.
Yeah, right, exactly. So once upon a time, girl meets boy. And basically, I got into a relationship with this guy, and it was going pretty well, except that I didn't really feel met in terms of the sex. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to be kind of specific about what was going on, partly because of my research and how much I've seen that this is very, very, very common. So we will call this guy Nate. And Nate had a huge heart, and he was very masculine and really kind of polarized me and put me in my feminine. So I felt desired. I felt turned on. I felt lit up. I felt all of those things. However, Nate was pretty rough with his hands. Mm. So when he would touch me, like fingering or other things like that, it hurt. Actually, it was painful, and I didn't know how to speak up about this. So what I tried to do was, at one point I said, I'd really love if you touched me lighter with your hands, because I feel more that way. I feel like more, I'm more sensitive, and I can really feel the sensation. And when it's too heavy, it kind of numbs me out, and then I can't feel anything.
Yeah.
So that worked for about 2 minutes. So he adjusted for about 2 minutes, and then he went back to the way that he'd been doing it, because you have to remember, he'd been doing this for, I think, 29 years at that point. He was 29, or you know what I mean? Ever since.
And no one's teaching them proper skills and tools and hands-on to-dos and showing them.
Exactly.
So it becomes an assumption.
Yeah, exactly. And we will get to that in terms of the research, because I discovered some really interesting things about that. But so I'm with Nate, and I express myself. I say this, and I'm, really excited that he adjusted for a little while. But I'm also feeling discouraged, because I'm sort of okay, but it's back to the way that it was. So then the next time it happened, I just said, gentle, 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 because we were in the moment, and he was doing it too hard. And again, I was in pain. It hurt. And so I just said, gentle, gentle, gentle. And he didn't really adjust. He kind of did for a little while, but not as much as I needed him to, and not for as long as I needed him to, which was sort of I need this to be different, right? I need this to be different. So I tried once, I tried twice, and then I gave up.
Okay.
And essentially, the way I felt about it was sort of like, I guess this is just how our sex is. Like, I sort of like, I didn't,
it is what it is, and not a very happily accepting sort of way, but just resigning to that, right?
yes. And I feel very fortunate because I've had really, really excellent sex in my life. I'm one of, a certain percentage of women that is lucky enough to have had some really skillful partners and to have felt really, really met in that way. I think there's a lot of women that have never had that experience. And so from where I was standing, I was sort of like, well, I don't want this to be the sex that I'm having for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were like other things that were going on in the relationship. It's not like, this was the only thing that was happening, but I vividly remember the night that we had sex, and afterwards I was like, this isn't what I want for the rest of my life. Like, I'm putting a stake in the ground. I want this to be better. And I couldn't figure out how to do that with him. And so I broke up with him.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, like, he was very into me. Like, he never said this, but he sort of like alluded to like wanting to marry me and wanting to have a family with me. So this wasn't just like a fling. This was a serious relationship.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to see, like, I was really curious about other people's experiences in this area. I was like, I wonder if this is happening to other people. Like, what are our sex lives really like? And I am a writer, and my pieces tend to do very well. And so what I did was I wrote an article called My Top 3 Sex Problems as a Woman. And I embedded a survey at the end of that article. And the article went viral, and I got, over 3,000 survey responses, something like that. Yeah, which is really saying something, because not everybody that reads the piece takes the...
Think of how many women read that, thought about it, answered it in their head, and just didn't respond, right? Out loud.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I wasn't just asking women. I was asking both sexes, like, what are your top 3 sex problems?
Okay.
And I also asked, what are your top 3 dating problems, and what are your top 3 relationship problems? And then I kept asking questions in this way, collecting data across a number of surveys. So the sex research that I have now has thousands of data points, and it's different. I ask different questions in different surveys, but the one that I want to highlight has to do with the story I told. So in one of the surveys, I asked people, have you ever broken up with someone because of the sex? Yeah. So I asked men and I asked women, and most of my research is heteronormative, meaning I'm asking mostly heterosexual men and women who have sex with each other. But not all of my surveys are that way. But what I find is that like 98 to 99% of my respondents are heterosexual. So just to throw that out there, this is mostly
putting
like
a context
straight.
and framework around the
Yeah, exactly. So what I found was that 49% of men said, yes, I have ended a relationship because of the sex.
Okay.
And this was not particularly surprising to me, because I think sex is really important to men, and, often seen as
and I
more
would say
important
probably
to men.
Culturally and socially speaking, a presumption it's more important to men than women. That's an
totally
assumption.
agree. I think that's definitely the perspective that we tend to take. And but what I found was that when I asked the women the same question, the number was higher, not lower. I thought it would be like, 35% or something like that, like significantly lower than the men's, but it actually turned out to be 61% of women. Yeah. And then another 4% said other. So I gave them the option, like yes, no, other, and they could fill in a response there. And so another 4% of women said other. And when I read those, a lot of them said, I've never done it before, but I'm thinking about it right now.
Okay.
So they were in relationships where the sex wasn't working for them, and they were considering ending the relationship because of that. So I actually think that number is more like 62 or 63%, if you're going to be exact about it, which is almost 2/3 of women. almost 2/3.
That's a huge amount of women, Melanie.
It's staggering. Yeah.
And so I was
really surprised.
Yeah, I can imagine people listening to this now, like they're answering these questions in their own head as we're talking. And, just putting out there of how many of us are satisfied in our sex lives, in our relationship. So glad you're doing this research. So what else have you uncovered?
Well, and that's the thing is like, it's not just like, are we satisfied in our sex lives, but like, do we feel safe talking to our partner about that?
Mm-hmm.
Do we feel safe to bring it up? And do we feel safe, do we feel safe in bringing it up? Do we know how to bring it up? And do we know how to kind of like stick with it until we feel met?
Well, it's so interesting. As a marriage and family therapist, I work with a good handful of couples. And over the course of my life, I have become much more comfortable talking about sex, which isn't something many people know how to do in the beginning. So it's no fault of couples in relationship to not know how to bring it up, because no one role models this, right? Often seen as this taboo topic. But I find when I sit across from couples and I ask them, how is your sex life? And many of them, I don't have a statistic like you do, but many of them say, it's fine. They won't give it a lot more because it's still very vulnerable to talk about. But what I do know for certain is many are not talking about it. And I try to give the space to make talking about it really normal, because if we can't even talk about it, how are we supposed to do it?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the ultimate form of vulnerability, right? Lying there with your body exposed, spread wide open, making sounds. It's messy, it's dirty, it's awkward. And yet the conversation is going to be what actually can help, at least from my perspective. So I'm curious to see what you find around creating more vulnerability in the conversation tends to then increase the success in bed or out of bed, wherever you're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. In the forest.
Let's not limit it to the bed.
Right. So I was interested in hearing more about like how people were bringing it up, or like what was actually going on in terms of this. And so I started asking people specifically, like, okay, for example, without any sugarcoating, what is one thing you wish you could have told your last partner? This was one of my survey questions. And in my research, I trend towards giving open-ended questions. I don't do drop-downs. I tend not to do drop-downs because I want to hear what people say in their words.
Sure.
And I'm particularly interested in what I call like gaps between the data, meaning like women are saying one thing and men are saying something else. I'm very interested in those particular pockets. And this was one that came up very clearly. So I asked people, like, what's one thing that you wish you could have said to your previous partner? And one of the biggest responses I got from the women, or I guess we'll do the men first, because I think it sort of flows out of that way.
Okay.
So I'm asking the men, like, what do you wish you could have told a previous partner? And the men are saying things like, I wish she would have told me what she needed. I wish she could have told me what she wanted. I needed to know what worked for her, how to please her. They're talking about all these things like, I wish I could have said, tell me what you need, right? And the women on the other side, I'm like, what is something that you wish you could have told a previous partner? And they're saying, I wish I could have told him what I needed. I wish I could have told him what I wanted, what I liked, and more importantly, what I didn't like.
So
I wish I could have been open.
So the disconnect there for couples is an assumption of maybe what their partner would want to hear or what they'd be able to implement, or the safety in actually expressing what you really feel.
Yeah, and what I found was that men in general want to know, but they're afraid to ask. So what I mean by that is they sort of go along through a sexual encounter assuming the woman will tell them if something isn't working. Okay. Right? So like Nate, I think the truth is that Nate figured like, oh, if the way that I'm, fingering her isn't working, she'll tell me. Okay. Or if the way that, whatever I'm doing, like if what I'm doing isn't working, she'll tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I teach in my work is that when the man leads, the woman melts. When the man leads, when he takes the lead and asks proactively and repeatedly, then she actually does feel safe to share. So in my experience with Nate, for example, he never asked me like, hey, I really want sex to feel good for you. It's important to me. I want to know if anything isn't working or if something's working that you want more of. I want to know.
That I
that
agree.
Never happened.
Their heart and their eyes and their body would all react with such like, oh my God, really? You're really asking this? Because it really would demonstrate a level of presence, a level of giving, a level of communication, and I think gentleness and attention that women aren't used to. Yes.
And I think, and this is where like, I want to kind of bring something else from the research that I think is important, because I was asking people about, their top sex problems, right? Number one sex problems. And this was another one that was very, very disparate in the research. So men's number one sex problem was, I can't tell if what I'm doing is working.
Okay.
Tied with, I wish my woman would initiate more. I feel like I'm always the one initiating sex.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and that is tied to like his feeling desired, his feeling wanted in the relationship, his frustration around like not having enough sex, sort of deprivation, like all of that stuff is tied up there, right? So like, I wish my woman would initiate more. Okay. That's his number one problem.
Okay.
Her number one sex problem is pain. Her number one sex problem is things hurting. That's tied with trouble orgasming. So the reason that what I said was so important of what men can do proactively to offer their partner is, I always want to know if something isn't working or hurts.
Yeah.
The reason to be proactive about that is because so many women are saying like, basically like, it's too rough and it's too fast for my body. Like the pacing of what sex is like in our culture is mostly modeled and off of porn. And that doesn't actually work for female bodies. So a lot of men are following a sexual script that is too hard and too fast. And I'm talking with your hands, not just, with intercourse. Like I'm talking the whole encounter from what I'm looking at in the research, everything like going down on women, using your hands, intercourse, foreplay, all of it. It's like slow down and use way less pressure than you're currently using, and you'll automatically be better. But the point is that making it safe for her to share what isn't working is just as important as, I want to know what your fantasies are. I want to know, like opening up a discussion about sex. The research is showing us that millions of women are experiencing pain. So,
how much do you think is related to either their body not responding and getting wet, but that could be layers behind that around, feeling safe, emotional connection, chemistry, or simply using lubricant could ease that pain? Because some of it is maybe fast and hard, but if her body's not producing that natural lubricant, it's going to be painful.
So I'm going to use myself. Yeah. So I'm going to use myself as an example. I don't have a history of sexual trauma. I'm not a rape survivor or child sexual abuse survivor. And I'm generally like a pretty sexual person. So I have no problem with my libido, yada, yada, yada. I have had a lot of partners. So I have a pretty big data set to be pulling from.
Okay.
And what I can tell you is that when the pacing is slow, when the man is going slowly enough for my body to come to arousal, and when he is using gentle pressure, that it's sort of like building a fire, right? Like you're using gentle pressure at first, and then you're building to more pressure or more intensity. Every single time that has been in place, I have gotten turned on, I have gotten wet, and the sex has been pleasurable.
Yeah.
Every time that it has been too fast and the pressure has been too much, especially at first, I have felt pain. So I believe that absolutely there are cases, especially around trauma, where the woman herself, like her body needs to do some sexual healing first in order to respond sexually. But I believe that in the vast majority of cases, 80 to 90% of the time, what we're talking about here like men understanding the pacing, making it safe for her, slowing down and being way more gentle, building the fire will solve those problems that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm very similar to you on a few of those counts of no sexual trauma in the past, nothing that would otherwise in my body make it difficult for that natural response to occur. But being in a relationship for many years in my past in which there lacked a lot of part of it, I think, was natural chemistry, which you can't force and you can't fake. We know that. Kissing wasn't even very pleasurable. So even at the most basic point of connection and intimacy was really hard. Yeah. And I wouldn't get wet. And I, for years, used to think, oh my God, something's wrong with me. Yeah. Like I literally thought there was a physical problem there. And it's, it makes sex not something to look forward to and to not be a good point of connection, not have it be physical. And yet when you're young, you don't necessarily know, maybe it's about having different foreplay. Maybe it's foreplay that's not even sexual. Maybe it's those little things throughout the day that build anticipation, that make you feel good, that build conversation and vulnerability in emotional ways, right? And I remember, after being out of that relationship and being with different partners, and especially now currently in my relationship, being like, okay, that's actually not a problem with me. My body works just fine. And it's amazing to me because me and my ex post-divorce have actually had some conversations about our post-divorce sex life and realizing, wow, we just weren't good together. And whether it's for a variety of other issues, but it's been really fascinating to say, whereas maybe I put a judgment on him of you can't just get me there, and so now it's your fault, you're not good enough. Or me saying, I don't like the way this feels, and so I don't want that. So whichever way the finger was pointing, we've both kind of, soon after our divorce, were able to come back and be like, oh, wow, we both can have really great success. Yay for us. Like this wasn't personal, and it wasn't a problem. And I think that was a big relief because I didn't know that. I thought something was wrong with my body. And there's so many factors that go into that play. And I love that you're describing this in a very tangible, straightforward, kind of tool-driven mindset for both men and women to have a framework of questions to be asking for when it works and when it doesn't work. So I think there's a lot of fear in coming across as rejection if you say that doesn't feel good. So I think there is a finesse, and I'm really big in teaching tools of communication. There is a real finesse in owning your experience without externalizing any blame, and especially inciting any rejection, especially if it's a new partner. But using it as an opportunity to build connection and, vulnerability in a really intimate way. And, whether it's a, hey, I really enjoy when you do this. And, so one of the things I would say in therapy is you want to positively give feedback on the behaviors you wish to continue. So positive reinforcement for what you continue to like. And, this feels really great when you do this. And that's an easier statement to say of, I don't like that, and maybe redirecting to what you do like.
Yeah. And I'm really glad that you spoke to that fear of maybe it's me, maybe there's something wrong with me as a woman, because that shows up in the research consistently, especially with the word broken. Yeah. So women will often use the word like broken. I'm afraid that I'm broken. I'm afraid he's going to think that I'm broken. I feel like there's something wrong with me. I just can't, my libido is just low. I just don't have a sex drive. There's a lot of fear and shame for women around feeling broken. And that does not show up in the research for men. That is very specifically one of those gaps that I was talking about. I'm not sure I've ever seen the word broken on the men's side. For a lot of men, the shame lives in fear of not performing well. So erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, things like that. But for women, there is a lot of this God, is there something wrong with my body? I should be turned on. I should be wet. This should work better. There's something wrong with me.
And let me give you a statistic. It really can mess, with the whole intimacy when we're stuck in that cycle and spinning in our heads around it. It makes it really hard to get back into the body.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it's right. It's the same for both sexes around not being in the body and being in your head. But I just want to normalize this. So when when you physiologically hook humans up to evaluate arousal, what you find is that the male body, it's 7 minutes to come to full physiological arousal, meaning all systems go, everything's happening, skin flush, genital, the blood flowing, everything's happening.
Okay.
7 minutes. Women don't take 14 minutes, which would be double the time. We don't take 21 minutes, which would be triple the time. We take 45 minutes to come to full physiological arousal.
Wow.
So the female body, take all of the shame and everything else away. We just take longer to come to arousal than men, period.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Melanie, that is huge information to share, because if we all knew that, we would now know what to do with that so we could meet up at the right level of arousal for men and women.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that every sexual encounter needs to be 45 minutes.
Sure.
That's not the takeaway, because the average encounter is 20 minutes. And you don't need to be at peak arousal every single time.
Okay.
The point is just, like you said, the differential. Like for men to really, really understand, it takes us longer. It takes us longer to build up. So touch, kissing, foreplay, the reason that women are constantly screaming at me about foreplay in my surveys all the time is that we just need more to get there, to really, to feel it, to want it, to like anticipate it, like all of that stuff. And so it just takes us longer.
Do you find that foreplay is kind of what I mentioned earlier, that exists both in and out of the bedroom, that a lot of it is the emotional connection leading to them feeling more excited sexually?
Yeah, so that depends on the woman, but it absolutely comes up in the research. So one of the things I asked was, what do the men that are best in bed have in common? So think about the top 3 men you've ever slept with, and then what do they have in common? And at least 15 to 20% of the women talked about, you know, he texted me sexy things beforehand. I felt seen. I felt like he saw me as a person. So there was a lot of that sort of non-sexual touch, right? That was turning her on. That was helping her body become ready to want to welcome him inside her. So absolutely, like it depends on the woman, but that's definitely part of the equation for a lot of women in terms of their actual sexual turn on.
Yeah, it makes me think about the line from that Alanis Morissette song. Do you know the phrase I'm thinking of?
I love her. I probably do.
Which song? It's oh god, which song? It was on her Jagged Little Pill album, but she talks about intellectual intercourse.
Oh yeah, yes, I remember that.
And so I think, you know, again, for women, all those little things, it can become a huge turn on.
Yeah, and this is something that I think is pretty. I like to do what I call a sex debrief, so that after you have sex with each other, and I really love when the man leads this, but either partner can lead it, where you each go back and forth and you just trade like one thing that really turned me on, one thing I loved, I enjoyed, and one thing I might want more of. So that you're getting feedback along the way. Yeah, so that you're getting feedback along the way, because if you're a man and she says like, I really felt seen and like sexy when you sent me that text today, you know, he's going to be like, oh wow, I hadn't associated putting attention on her during the day with hot sex at night, but now I do. Right.
Oh, and that was so
I think
I can do that again.
Yeah, exactly. So I think having like a sex debrief every time or every other time or consistently, and the man leading that can really give him some useful information to like really get it. And, you know, if you are leading that and you're making this space safe, you might hear things like, I'd love like less pressure with your hands, like even more gentle. And so like keep adjusting, because that's something that I think happens a lot in this sort of arena is men in particular, we all do this, but men in particular kind of, it's like they're winning or they're losing. It's very binary. So like, I'm doing it right, I'm doing it wrong. Like it's working, it's not working.
Right.
And when it comes to sexuality and sexual touch and things like that, it's really more of a continuum. So it's helpful to just think about it as adjusting instead of I'm doing it right or I'm doing it wrong. Right. So like continue to like scale the pressure back if she keeps talking about less pressure. And the reason I keep bringing that up is because it keeps coming up in the research. I really can't stress that enough, how little pressure it can take to really turn a woman on, and how much too much pressure hurts.
Yeah. Well, and what I love what you're saying, Melanie, too, is because I'm also thinking of, the broader experience for couples. These are great questions to ask, regardless if it's just about sex. Like, how much more health and awareness could we bring into our experience as partners if we just did these check-ins?
Yes.
On many things that we're doing, whether it's
yes.
how we're showing up in dividing up the chores in the house, or if you're married, dealing with parenting or planning dates, because this is something that I hear a lot from frustrated couples in marriage counseling, is generally the woman wants the husband to plan more dates and to be the one taking the lead in taking them out. And I've often asked, well, have you ever actually specifically asked him to take the lead in this area? And they're like, well, no, he should just know because I do it all the time. So now it's his turn. Well, without without communication, how are they supposed to know?
Yeah, exactly.
These questions are really simple. And I love that you're finding it can bring positive results to the sex life. And I'm going to expand that and say it would help in many areas of a relationship.
Yeah, you can also do a love debrief. So like, when in the last week did you feel loved by me? Mm-hmm. And then is there anything that would help you feel loved?
I love it. It's so
and
simple.
Each person can share. Yeah, because it's really helpful to like think back over the last week or the last month and say like, man, when you picked up my mom from the airport, I felt so loved. Like you really took action on my behalf. And I just like, it made a huge difference to me that day. I just really felt that. Like that feels really good to like review and like you said, information for the future, because love languages I think are a moving target. And sometimes it's good to like actually, because we can say that we know what ours are, but when you actually are reviewing events that made you feel loved, it's even better information for your partner.
Well, and especially if you are in a non-committed relationship and you might have multiple partners back to back, what works for one is not going to work for another. Everybody's body is different. And if you don't do a check-in, you're basing it on a lot of assumptions. And early on in that coupling would be really hard to ask these really vulnerable questions. So the more we can normalize the conversation and say, hey, I want to have good sex, you want to have good sex, here's some ways we can both have good sex right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just really want to emphasize like how terrified women are to speak up about this. It's really, really, really scary. And that comes up in my research all the time. And so when the man leads the conversation, it really helps our bodies relax. Yeah. And when our bodies relax, we feel more turn on, we feel more pleasure, we feel more period. Yeah. So it really, really helps when the man leads the conversation, because I'm looking at the research and there are like 4 main reasons that women are terrified. One is that the man will like be like, well, fuck you. If you don't like the way I do it, then fuck you. Like that if we sort of speak up and we're like, oh, I'd love less pressure. Like, well, fuck you then. Go fuck someone else.
This is not how
he'll lash out.
Right.
Yeah. We're terrified he'll turn away. Like he'll just withdraw. So we'll say like, I'd love less pressure. And he'll be like, and he won't say anything, but he'll also kind of go away and eventually he'll leave us. We're terrified of that. Yeah. We're scared that we'll be slut shamed. Like, oh, wow, you're such a dirty little slut. You like it that way? That we'll be slut shamed. Yes, we're still afraid of that. That is still a thing. It still comes up in the research. Any step that you take towards us, we appreciate 100-fold because it's really scary for us to go first.
Yeah, I love this. So in wrapping up, just so, as there's so many different ways we can keep talking about this. I'm really curious if you have anything in your research around stigmas of porn, sex toys, and kind of having a dom sub sort of relationship go on. Have you done research in any of those areas?
Did you say stigmas around that?
Yeah, and how, maybe some fears of people communicating about these maybe slightly more taboo topics in sex, ways that they're bringing it up, or ways that maybe they're acting it out, or showing in the bedroom.
Yes. So, yes, I have done that research. And again, it's one of the topics that's really scary, again, for either partner to share, but especially women, because we've been socially sort of programmed to not be sexual. Like, be sexy, but don't be sexual.
Right.
What I would say is that what's really helpful is for both partners to kind of hold the frame of, this is sacred, right? So if your partner says, like, I'm kind of interested in like exploring like bondage or like rope stuff, you know, how do you feel about that? That's an incredibly vulnerable thing for that person to say. So
Sure.
to first hold it as sacred, like, wow, thank you for sharing. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for telling me.
Judgment around it or an expectation or
that, like,
assumption.
starting with an acknowledgement of how fucking vulnerable it is to actually speak to something that you want in sex, either partner, whether it's him or her, to have that be your first response of thank you for telling me. And then if you're not available for that, like, I love that you told me that. I'm actually not available for that right now, but let's talk more about why you want that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that the language around it, because I think what happens for a lot of people is they hear something that their partner wants. They don't feel comfortable with it, or they don't feel safe, or they don't, whatever they're having a response, and they lead with that. And that shuts the other person down instead of
like rejection.
Like, oh, yes. And it's terrifying. It's a terrifying thing to bring up. And then you just feel more shut down. And that tends to generate a cycle of like, well, now I'm not going to tell you anything. Right. So instead,
I clearly don't feel safe in this relationship. I clearly get rejected when I communicate something that feels scary or vulnerable. So I won't do that again.
Exactly. So instead of that, if you say, thank you for telling me, thank you for trusting me to tell me that, I'm not feeling comfortable with it, or I don't feel available for that right now, but let's talk more about why you want that, right? Like, create a space to talk about it, even if you're not going to do the act. For a lot of people, just feeling heard around what they want, feeling safe around sharing that, creates a ton of connection and trust and vulnerability. And honestly, you might change your mind. Everybody's boundaries are, boundaries are a moving target. Absolutely honor your boundaries. Don't do something you don't want to do. But when you create space for that dialogue, you might find your boundaries shift. You might find that they don't. But that language, I think, is really helpful of like, I'm not available for that right now, but let's talk about it. I want to hear more about your experience and why you want that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for responding to that, because I think we can create so much safety and then we can shut it down so fast.
Absolutely.
And, especially if we're in a long-term relationship where we might not know how to get out of that cycle of insecurity because we now have built up multiple that I can't do it now. I tried again. It might be different when you have a new partner to test the new waters, but being in a committed relationship, some of those slightly more, and I put it in air quotes, if you could see me, these taboo topics, and I say it because I just don't think they're mainstream common what everyone thinks of what sex, but I think there's no negativity to it. It's only what our own, whether it's upbringing or just curiosity, makes us feel uncomfortable around. But I also think it's the very things that can create longevity in a really successful sex life when you are committed in a long term, because you got to find ways to stay creative. You cannot do the same thing every day and expect it to, be equally as good. So creating novelty, creating new ways to have passion or excitement, role playing, or, I've suggested to clients, hey, go date your partner and go pick them up in a hotel bar like you're having an affair, but have that with your partner and bring a level of passion and excitement, taking her up to the room or him up to the room. Like, you got to do things out of the box sometimes, but that can be really scary to invite in as a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good example of sometimes you can use fantasies as a way in, like talking about fantasies. And the trick is that if it's edgy, like if it's the one you don't want to share, that's where the energy is. Like, the edge is where the energy is. The risk taking is where the energy is. That's where the sexual polarity lives. So it's the thing that we don't want to share, or we're afraid to share. That's where turn on lies.
Yeah.
So it's like that dance of coming closer to someone, it is revealing those things. And, that's hard. Like, that's why vulnerability is vulnerable. You're like, I don't want to say that. I'm so scared.
So something I think women come up a lot against in sexual relationships and it might be difference of expectations and preference, but I'm curious about your area of research in blowjobs and swallowing. What can you share?
Oh, that's an interesting one. So I haven't done a specific survey around that topic. I have done stuff around oral sex, and what I find interesting in the discussion with women is that for some women, the act of giving a blowjob feels really empowering. Like, oh, I have a lot of power here, and there's a lot of like positive feelings that go along with that. And then for some women, the association is more like doing something I don't want to do, or doing something just to sort of like placate my partner, or because I feel like I should, or because they do it in porn before they have intercourse, like I'm supposed to, right? Like it's part of the script. So that's more of what I've looked at rather than like swallowing or not. But I'm curious, like what has your experience been, or where is the question coming from? Is there like another associated tangent?
I think part of it is a difficulty in women having the conversation with expectations around their partner.
Meaning like, I know you want me to swallow and I'm not available for that, or like that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think women have a hard time doing that. And so can easily, and I'm using blowjob as an example, but it could be maybe anal sex. It could be introducing toys, but that's I hear women most commonly, whether it's with girlfriends or in my therapy office sessions, an easier one for women to talk around. Everyone has an opinion, right, about blowjobs and swallowing. So it's always, something that maybe in what you're saying in the beginning of a man asking the woman preferences on this might shift their response to what may be an expectation or a turnoff, depending on the situation, and how that conversation can flow to create more connection and vulnerability and ultimately intimacy, versus operate from, oh, well, every other partner I had did that, so why aren't you? Or I do everything for you, why don't you do this for me? Or that doesn't feel comfortable to me, can you accept that? And I think it's a harder topic of conversation to have than when referring to some more mainstream sexual positions or preferences.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I like what you said about sort of leading a conversation like, hey, I want to make it really safe for us to talk about this. I really enjoy receiving oral sex, and I really enjoy giving it. Where are you on that scale? Like what are you comfortable with? Like, how is this for you?
Yeah.
Like, I would really love for a man to lead that conversation, because for me personally, for example, I find blowjobs to be more intimate than intercourse.
Oh, yeah.
I would rather have intercourse and do, like, this is a boundary of mine. I will only have intercourse with new partners. I will not give blowjobs until I'm in a committed relationship with that man. To me, it's the most intimate.
Yeah.
And to me, there's a lot of power dynamics involved, and I don't feel that safe doing it with someone that I'm not committed to. So I have always led that conversation, because in my experience, most men aren't leading conversations around these topics because they don't know how to, or they're scared to. I'm not exactly sure why. But I've been the one to sort of be like, hey, can we talk about this? And I'll often do that, like, as he's going to go down on me, because I feel so anxious that he's going to go down on me and then expect me to do the same. And I don't want to feel like I owe him. Yeah. So I'll often be like, hey, I just need to like express something like before. I really love oral sex and I love receiving it. And I just need you to know, like, I only give blowjobs if it's like my man, like I'm committed to that man, and that's like I'm in a relationship with him. So if that affects like what you do, like totally get it. That's no problem. I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah.
But again, I would really love for, the men to kind of lead around that and just be like, let's talk about this. Like, what's your deal? Like, you know, what do you like? What do you not like? Like, what are you available for? What are you not?
I like the way you're phrasing that. I think I love, I think language is incredibly powerful, and it is subtle, but really powerful. So the way that you're saying the word I'm available or I'm not available for that is such a gentle way of naming where you're at without there being any rejection, but fully owning your experience and your emotions and your thoughts and your body and your needs.
And your boundaries.
Yes.
Yeah, and your boundaries. Yeah, exactly.
And it's also being available to me is really present moment. And so it's not a closed door. This is where I'm at right now.
Exactly. I'm available for, I'm not available for is a more neutral way of sharing it for both, you know, your partner, but also for yourself, like allowing for like, maybe I might be available for that in the future. I don't know.
And so
but this is where I'm at right now.
Yeah. I think the key there is, don't think you just have a conversation and it's one and done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, but just to reiterate, as we're wrapping up in a moment, to really have the conversation and loop back around and constantly do that check-in. Because I think that's how you can stay really present. You can do a check-in of, hey, here was our boundaries before. Where are you at now? Has it shifted? Are you still feeling comfortable? Is this still working for you? What are your needs? You know, I think that's such a healthy model for growth and for connection and intimacy and vulnerability.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to say like, hey, I'm feeling a little anxious to share this, or I'm feeling vulnerable sharing this, just so you know, like to introduce, if you're going to share something that's scary for you, you can let your partner know that. Like, let that person know this is hard for me to say, because then you're kind of creating like an ally there and sort of like alerting the person to like, hey, something vulnerable is happening here. Like, it's a good idea to pay attention. Because I think sometimes we sort of just say things and the other person doesn't realize, like, this is a scale, like on a scale of 10, this is a 9 vulnerable for me.
Sure.
Right? Like, hey, just heads up. And another useful one can be like, okay, it's really hard for me to hear that, and I'm here.
Right.
Because I think acknowledging like, okay, that's hard for me to hear, and I'm still here.
And I'm
sort
still
of
here.
Does both things at the same time. Yes, exactly.
It's the and, not the but, that is so powerful in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the but shuts it down, the and allows space for it. Okay, one last thing I want to ask you about, and then we'll wrap it up. But what in your research, if any, have you found women responding saying, I could care less if I ever have sex again?
What I come across a lot is the phrasing of, oh, sex just isn't a priority for me.
Okay.
That's the phrasing that women tend to use, especially if they're in longer term partnerships. They'll also say things like, oh, my libido, I just don't have a strong libido. Like, my sex drive just isn't that high. And, but I think what you're alluding to is sort of the like, yeah, it's not that important. It's not a priority for me. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's a red flag in a relationship. I don't know about you. I mean, you work with couples, so I'd love to hear your perspective on it as well. But I would say that's the main thing from the research that I have seen is sex just isn't a priority for me, is the way that it tends to be phrased.
And and I would
on the women's side. On the women's side.
Yes, and I'm talking specifically on the women's side because that's where I hear about it most with clients or with girlfriends. And whenever I hear that, I always want to qualify it with the response of either right now or with this partner. It's not permanent. It's not necessarily you. And this is, barring any medical or health concerns that might, limit your body to being present and available for that. So barring medical concerns, that's going to prevent their body from being present, available, it feeling good, right? Where they really have a medical issue of why sex just isn't their jam, or they just are in so much pain from a medical concern, which I've seen happen with different clients and friends. Yeah. I find so much of a strong and thriving sex life lies in the context of safety and emotional connection and vulnerability outside the bedroom. Yes. I mean, especially for women. It's really hard in a more long-term committed relationship, right? Obviously in more newer, novel one-night stands, or if you're just, dating, it's going to be more exciting because it's more new and there's a lot more hormone dump happening when we're with a newer partner. But I'm referring to couples who are in long-term committed relationships, and there's factors of parenting and stress and the chores and the kids and the house and the bills and the jobs and the aging parents and you name it, and sex becomes lowest on the list. But one of the things that I think is so powerful, and I've learned just how powerful it is by having very dichotomous experiences of sex and relationship, is sex is a highlight of everything else going on in the relationship, right? Because I love this idea that Esther Perel says, and I'm not even sure it's her original quote, but I've heard her say it, so I will give her the credit of saying sex is emotion in motion. And I find that to be so true, because when something is off kilter in the relationship, it's going to show up in the bedroom. It's going to show up in our availability, as you say, in our vulnerability, in our communication, in our receiving, in our acceptance, in our giving. And, you know, so sex becomes this bigger picture where I used to just think sex was sex. And I now understand sex is such an integral part of a long-term committed relationship because everything gets highlighted there.
Yeah, it's kind of like a barometer. And I would say that one thing that does show up in the research in this area is hidden resentments. Hidden resentments are sex killers.
Well, and it will shut down. And, you know, there's another great, fabulous couples therapist named Terry Real, and he says, marriage is death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah.
And it's all those little things. It's not really the big things often. It's the little things that add up and add up and add up. And the easiest thing to do when you're feeling resentful is to withdraw sexually.
Yes. Yes. It's true. Especially the feminine. Because we're the ones that open our bodies. And so if we contract and we're literally physically, I'm doing contracting motion.
Yeah, literally.
It's also shutting down our vulva. Yeah.
Literally.
It's totally can't, agree with you more. I can't agree with you more.
Well, Melanie, I feel like we could talk for hours. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all the sex research you've done. And it's so helpful. And I love that you're giving really solid tools that are relatively easy. And I say relatively because there's a lot of vulnerability in communicating those questions that you're posing people to ask. But I think they would find it's going to benefit them tenfold on so many levels to be able to be a little bit more vulnerable in their communication and watch what the benefits will reap by doing so.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. I want to make things simple.
Yes. How can people find you?
So I have a website, but I'm going to give you a simple version. So I have a course for men and couples called Please Her in Bed. So you can go to pleaseherinbed.com and that'll take you to the course, and that'll also take you to my website.
Perfect.
And that is a self-led course. So couples that want to expand in this area can go through the material on their own time, in their, at their own pace. So if you're not maybe ready to see a sex therapist, or that feels intimidating to one or both of you, you have to be free at the same time, stuff like that, then you can take this course as kind of like a sex 101 type of let's open up the conversation in a fun and safe way for both of us. So awesome. pleaseherinbed.com.
And we'll have those links in the show notes so people can easily get to click right on that and not have to remember it, because it'll be all right there and available for them. And Melanie, I really honor it. You're doing awesome work, and people need more of this conversation. So maybe at some future time we can have another talk, because I think this is a topic that I really like to bring up with my clients and give some really normalcy and freedom around languaging around this stuff.
Yeah.
We don't know how to do it. And yet
I totally agree.
We all want to feel connected. We all want to have amazing orgasms. We all want to feel loved and seen and pleasured, and we want to please. And a lot of it is skill building. And that's what I teach with my clients. It's a fantasy to believe that we're going to meet this person and everything's going to align. And when it doesn't align, we think something's wrong with me, something's wrong with them, something's wrong with us. I'll move on. I mean, that's kind of
exactly. And we're not born learning math. We don't know math. We learn math in school. We can learn things about sex that make sex better.
Absolutely.
It's like you said, we have this expectation that we just know how to do it. It doesn't work like that. And it does get better when you learn.
it absolutely does.
Yeah.
Amen to that, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you
so much. And I love talking, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.